Fly Away Home was born at a press conference where Eliot Spitzer, the governor of New York, is up there on the podium with his long-suffering wife beside him, apologizing to the people of the state of New York for the $5,000 hooker. And like many women, I'm watching this and I have many thoughts, and one of them is, what is a hooker doing for $5,000, and what could possibly be worth it? Do I need to do that too? Like, is there some kind of manual? And then I'm thinking, what's his wife doing there with him? Like, she didn't do anything wrong. Like, why is she sort of being co-opted into this script of apology when she could have just like kicked him out the house and said, like, you go have your press conference, I'm going to Canyon Ranch or wherever. So I wanted to write a story about a cheating politician, which is a story that we see a lot in the media these days. But I wanted to talk about what happens after the scandal erupts and then subsides, after the press conference is over, after he's given his speeches and decided to either remain in office or resign or whatever, and just sort of how do you pick up the pieces if you're the wife. And then I was also interested in how you pick up the pieces if you're an adult child, because a lot of these guys have daughters. It really seemed to be the common thread, and not talked about much, but like John Edwards has like a daughter who's in her 20s, and I'm watching that whole scandal unfold, with the mistress and the money and the love child and the sex tape, and thinking like, this poor girl, to be that age and just sort of launching your own life and having, dad's pregnant mistress's sex tape on the cover of the National Enquirer and just being like, oh God, like pants, dad, pants, like that whole thing. So I wanted, I was interested in those characters, the wives and the daughters, and the damage and how you get over it. I think that there's a lot that's familiar in Fly Away Home. I think the humor and the voice and the attitude and the concerns about women and their relationships. In terms of what's different, I think it's a very timely book. I think that, it's this first sort of quote unquote ripped from the headlines things I've ever done, where there was something that was happening in culture that I wanted to talk about like that minute kind of thing. And one of the narrators is this 57-year-old woman, the politician's wife, Sylvie, who is very, very, very different than I am. And I think a lot of my narrators have been kind of like me in terms of like my voice or where I am at that moment in my life. They're getting married, they're having babies, whatever. But Sylvie is sort of beyond where I am now in terms of age and in terms of experience, and her voice is very different. So she sounds very different. Like she never curses, which was hard for me to write, because I think that like in my head, not in front of my kids, but in my head, like there's this sort of monologue that contains the occasional expletive. But Sylvie is not like that, and she's an interesting character because she's a very kind of behind the scenes lady. She doesn't want to make speeches, be famous, be in front of people. She's like super duper uncomfortable doing all of that, and likes to be the power behind the throne, which is not me at all, but was very interesting to think about a kind of woman. Like it's not that she's powerless, but she's got a different kind of power that she exercises in different and subtle ways. And so she was very interesting to write, and I'm hoping she's going to be a nice surprise for my readers, where she's a little bit different than the woman that I would typically write about, but very interesting and I think sort of fully realized. Well, I was always a writer. Like, it was always the only thing I was ever any good at. Like, from first grade on, I can remember my teacher giving me extra paper and letting me stay in from recess so I could write stories. I was really, really lucky. I grew up with parents who were readers. I grew up in a house full of books. And everyone was always reading something. Parents were reading to kids, parents were reading to each other, we were reading by ourselves. And so that was always, I think that in some families it's like, oh, be a doctor, that's the best thing you can be a lawyer, that's the best thing you can be. And in my house, like, the idea of being a writer was pretty amazing. What finally happened was I got dumped, and I went through this like devastating, awful breakup when I was in my late 20s. The guy I thought I'd marry, and he wound up marrying somebody else, and it was terrible. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to write a book where the girl is a lot like me. First novel, it's sort of write what you know. So I'm going to write the girl who's me and the guy who's kind of Satan, and I'm going to give the girl the happy ending. Just it's sort of a way of writing my own what ifs kind of thing, like giving her the happy ending I have no idea if I'll ever get, because who knows, but that was how it all started, and that became Good in Bed. I kept my expectations like super duper low, like realistic. Like I'm like, okay, like 12 people will buy this and I'll know 6 of them from my Weight Watchers group. And like, that'll be that and it'll be great. And hopefully it'll sell well enough that I can write and publish the next one. The book's been out for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I'm home in Connecticut to do a reading at the bookstore in my little town. And I'm out for pizza with my mother's book club, and my brother comes into the restaurant, my brother Joe, and he hands me this slip of paper, and on the slip of paper is written number 35. And Good in Bed had made the New York Times extended bestseller list, which goes 1 through 35. It was number 35 on the list, and I could not believe it. In terms of the progression of the books, I think, first novel, everybody sort of writes the me character and the me story. And that was true with Good in Bed. It was sort of the 28-year-old me, and like everything she was doing and everything I wanted in my own life was all there. But as I have sort of gone on as a writer, I've been able to think, there's usually somebody who's kind of like me in the books, a little bit like me, or pieces of me, or snatches or snippets or glimpses of me. But I think I've been able to sort of think about, I think women's stories interest me. Like the way that we as women have so many more choices than we ever did, and the way that can both empower you and cripple you. Because I think it used to be really easy. Like, you didn't have to ask a lot of questions about what your life was going to look like because you knew what it was going to look like. You were going to maybe go to school or maybe not, and maybe work for a little while, but mainly what you were going to do was get married and have kids, and you were going to do it at this age because, in your 20s, that's when it happens, and you were going to be a wife and run a house, and maybe you'd eventually have, you'd be a nurse or a teacher or something like that. But now it's like everything's possible for women. My deal with sort of taking the raw material of real life and using it in books, it's sort of a two-pronged solution. If you're somebody who is in my life, if you're a family member, a friend, loved one, whatever, and I'm using stuff you've done or stuff you've said or basing anything on you, then you get to read the book ahead of time. And my deal is, here's the manuscript. Let me know if anything bothers you, if there's anything that's like gonna get you in trouble anywhere, and I'll change it. Because there are writers who honestly believe that writers just cannot concern themselves with the reactions of living people because you're writing for the ages and you're writing for history, and so who cares if Aunt Tilly gets her knickers in a bunch about what you said about her or her kid or her husband or whatever. But I don't know where those writers go for the holidays, but like I gotta go home to mom, so I do not want to upset her. So that's prong one. And prong two is like, if someone is so terrible that, if somebody has done something so remarkably awful that I feel like to not use that material would be an affront to God, then I just have to sort of be like, they're so awful, they're never going to recognize themselves, because awful people do not know they're awful. But I do have this piece of advice for other writers who are struggling with this. Like if your aunt is horrible, or your grandmother's horrible, or your mother-in-law does something terrible, and you use it, and the person then confronts you and says, "Is this me?" You look them in the eyes and you say these magical words. Why would you think that? Because nobody is going to say, well, I'm a bitch, and I was really mean to you at your wedding or whatever it's going to be. Like they never ever know it's them. So you're safe. When I called my first book Good in Bed, I was a single lady. I was not married. I hadn't had kids. And now that I'm the mother of 2, I don't know that I would have called a book Good in Bed. I think I might have called it Don't Read This, Lucy. It's really boring. I mean, I wanted to be a little cheeky, and I wanted to sort of, I knew people would stop in a bookstore and pick up a book called Good in Bed. Like they had to see if there were pictures, So I felt very confident about the marketing possibilities of that title. But now that I'm a mom, there's a little cringe going on. But no, I think I've been fair, and where I haven't been fair, I've been funny, so it's all okay. I mean, my fans are fantastic. My fans make me laugh. My fans give me great feedback, and they're funny, and they tell me great stories. In terms of what they want to know, I mean, I think it's a lot of like, how much of this is true is a big one. And where do you get your ideas after I explain, that not much of it is true, that it's a lot of sort of like mining my own life for raw material and then refining it or shaping it or sculpting it or using it somehow, but it's not like I'm writing my diaries. And so then they want to know, well, how do you do fiction is the basic question. Like, how do you come up with these characters in these situations? I can't think of anything really weird that I've been given. Lots of chocolate, which isn't weird, but delicious. So if you would like to bring me some, feel free. What's next? Well, I'm fascinated by surrogate mothers, women who carry babies that are not genetically their own, and egg donors too, women who sort of donate the raw material that make these babies possible. So I'm thinking about writing about sort of a situation where it's this wealthy older woman who is newly married to this like super duper rich guy who has adult children, and she wants a baby, and the guy's kind of like nah about the whole thing, but she desperately wants a baby, and I'm thinking it's in part to sort of cement her affection and connection to this man that she's married, but I think it's also, I suspect, to ensure her place in his will, that she wants sort of the lines of descent to be clear. So she wants to have this baby and finds out that she's unable to, and has to enlist both an egg donor and a gestational surrogate, which is what they call the woman who has the baby. Any reader of my book, I want them to be entertained. I want them to laugh. I want them to have a good time. I want them to think about some issues, like not in a, I'm going to stand here and whap you over the head with my newspaper like a dog that just messed on the carpet kind of way. But, I want them to think about, the choices women make. Because I think it's really easy for women to judge one another. Like, it's easy for me to watch, a politician's wife at a press conference and, start singing Stand By Your Man, ironically, and be like, she's a bad feminist for being up there. Or she's a bad wife or whatever. And not to consider, my mom always told me, like, no one knows what's going on in a marriage except the two people who are in it. And that, I think, is something that people will come away with after reading Fly Away Home, because there's two marriages that I'm talking about. It's the politician and his wife, and then their daughter, and her husband. And very different marriages that sort of break apart for different reasons. So I think the idea of women judging women, and that maybe it's not the best thing. But again, like, I think that Fly Away Home is a really fun, diverting beach read that isn't just trashy and will make you think, and I hope the characters really resonate with readers.